What a bunch of BS. I want to play something for you. I heard it yesterday. I am no fan of CNN.
Really?
And I am no fan of Jake Tapper. But I'm also a fan of getting some news when I go out at 8:30 on a Sunday morning. I'm kind of in hope of getting some. There's no local stations anymore that provide news and weather. You got investment shows on all over the place. So I'm just setting up to tell you why I checked CNN, and I happened to catch Jake Tapper interviewing a woman named Dr. Rochelle Walensky. And Kenny, do you still have her credentials up on the screen?
I do. Dr. Walensky, Chief of Infectious Diseases at Massachusetts General Hospital, has been appointed by President-elect Biden to serve as Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I tried to enunciate.
Very well.
She is Biden's choice, in other words, to head up the CDC. And Tapper asked her yesterday specifically about getting the schools open. And I want you to hear it. I think every parent in America needs to hear this. And I'm not diminishing this woman's credentials. I'm sure she's very learned and an expert scientist. But man, as she drank the Kool-Aid of the gibberish, because I could not make heads or tail of this. Listen to this.
So you have said, quote, schools should be the last thing to close and the first thing to open, unquote. Should all students be back in classrooms before the end of this school year?
Good morning, Jake. Thanks for having me again. Really, what we have said in our guidance is that the amount of classroom activity really depends on the amount of spread in the community. We know that the amount of disease in the community is completely reflected as to what's happening in school. If there's more disease in the community, there will be more in school, and that most disease in school does not come from in-school transmission, but comes from outside into the community. So what we would advocate for is to have more kids in school as our community spread comes down.
So the CDC guidelines suggest schools could opt not to reopen in-person classes if they're in a red zone with the high community spread that you just referred to. According to our analysis of federal data, that includes 99% of American children. But you have said, quote, there's very little transmission happening in the schools. CDC researchers just wrote in JAMA that, quote, there's been little evidence that schools have contributed meaningfully to increased community transmission. So why give schools that opt not to open up?
It's a really great question. In that red zone that you're referring to, and in fact, yes, many of our current counties are in that red zone, although our numbers continue to decline. But in that red zone, we advocate for hybrid elementary school because we believe those K-5 kids are A, transmitting less, and B, really essential to have back in the classroom. And if you're in middle school or high school, we would advocate for virtual learning for that group. Or if you're able to do strict 6 feet of distancing in those classrooms, to open remotely in a hybrid way.
But President Biden has promised to always follow the science. Can you point to any scientific reasons for students in the United States not to return to in-person classes tomorrow, as long as schools are taking the 5 steps that we referred to earlier, masking, cleansing, et cetera? Why not open the schools right now?
You know, I think if you look at as you noted, there's 90% of communities with this high rate of transmission going on right now, and we really don't want to bring community disease into the classroom. We also know that mask breaching is among the reasons that we have transmission within schools when it happens. And so we really need to do the hard work to make sure that there's universal masking, there's strict 6 feet of distancing between, that there's cohorting or podding, so that there's a restriction of disease if it were to be transmitted, and all of the contact tracing and whatnot that needs to be done. And all of that is really hard to put together.
Well, but what's the science? Because you have said there's, not just you, but Dr. Fauci, others have been saying for months that the schools should be open as long as there's masking and cleansing and social distancing, everything that we talked about. if a school's doing that, I understand if there's a mask violation, that's a problem. But if a school's doing that, I mean, the damage, as I don't need to tell you, on kids, the isolation, the psychological damage, the educational loss of a year for many kids, not to mention the thousands of kids who are just slipping through the cracks. I mean, it's hard to even calculate. And there are a lot of people out there watching who think, like, I thought the science said we should open the schools as long as that we take those safety steps. We're taking the safety steps, and we're not opening the schools.
Yeah, so there are numerous research studies that have demonstrated that if with universal masking and 6 feet of distancing and de-densification of the classrooms, that it's possible to get schools back safely. With all of that happening, 92% of people in those studies were masked. We have other data that was just published in CDC's MMWR that demonstrate that somewhere around 60% of students are reliably masking. That has to be universal. So we have work to do, especially when the country remains in the red zone of high community transmission. As that transmission comes down, we'll be able to relax some of these measures. But the real point is to make sure that the science is consistent with our guidance, which is consistent to say, until we can ensure that we have all those measures happening, that the schools wouldn't be safe.
I don't know anything.
So schools are not going to be safe unless everybody is masking. I mean, I certainly hear that and understand that, but how do you open the school? I mean, I'm just really confused. It seems to me like you're saying the schools are safe to open as long as everybody takes these steps, but not everybody's taking these steps. Therefore, we're not going to open the schools. Do I have that right?
Well, we need to make sure that all of those steps are happening, and it's masking, it's distancing, it's potting and cohorting of the younger children. It is, cleaning of surfaces, it's hand washing, and it's contact tracing and diagnostic testing in an efficient manner in collaboration with departments of public health. Not all schools are able to do all of those things right now, and many of those schools are in red zone. So we need to make sure that as we come out of the red zones and do our part as a society to get down from red to lower area rates of transmission, and we need to do the work to get all of those mitigation strategies up and running in all of these schools. The American Rescue Plan has resources, $130 billion of resources to facilitate and help schools get there. And that's really why we're pushing for the rescue plan, so that we can facilitate getting those schools all of those mitigation measures so that they can open safely.
This is never going to change based on that logic.
Well, I don't think it's done yet. I think he finally says to her,
That was the whole clip. That was all.
I heard him say, in other words, these schools aren't going to open until everyone is vaccinated. And she didn't have an answer for that. I took a few notes.
It's a different kind of potting, Kenny, by the way.
If you caught her towards the end, she says, we have a $130 billion fund in a rescue plan to help schools do what? Clean surfaces?
Right.
In other words, lady, I wish you would have asked her, well, wait a minute. You're telling me that some schools can't clean surfaces and can't enforce a mask and can't mandate 6 feet. Why not? Do it. I've never heard such gibberish in my life. She even used the term mask breaching.
Yeah, I had to look it up.
God
Actually looked it
almighty.
up when she
Does
said
that just mean it's not over your nose and it's over your ear?
Well, worn improperly or whatever, mask breaching.
The American Rescue Plan. That's a new one to me. I didn't know we had it.
130 bill?
Wow.
And she said these basic things, the distancing, the cleansing, and the mask, they're hard to put together. No, they're not.
No, they're not.
No, they're not.
All right, let's see. Here's what we
All
got.
I know is this country has never behaved like this before. Again, this place is in the position of having to tell you that I'm aware that this could be a horrible illness,
Well, nobody doubts that.
Right. But throughout the history of time, who has ever behaved like this? They're talking
That
about these
phrase
kids
from-
not getting to school until next fall, if then.
That phrase is applicable across the board, Such, not just this subject. I mean, that phrase applies to everything this country is doing right now.
Yeah, it's never behaved this way before.
The way that schools are currently behaving, I'm not indicting teachers. I'm indicting the unions.
Unions.
And the damage that you're doing to young adults and children is absolutely criminal.
Yeah.
Absolutely criminal. I'm at least thankful because my 2 kids went back to school over a week ago, but there are some families out there that are struggling and they have no idea what to do.
Tapper to me sounded like a guy who has a bunch of kids at home.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, right. When can I send them?
I've got 3 upstairs running around now like wild characters.
We hear that.
But that's just because they're off school today because of President's Day. But they're all
Sounds
in
like
school.
Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah.
Up there.
They're all in school. They're all in school. $130
gonna-
billion we have to get you some disinfectant wipes. Jesus, God in heaven, I'm praying. This is amazing. This country has never behaved like this before. And why? Schools are basically open in red states for the most part, and not open in blue states. Why is this become politicized? Why does conservative thinking in the main gravitate towards the importance of these kids should be in school, and why does the Mysterian thinking believe they shouldn't be? I don't get it. I don't get it.
It's hard to follow.
Well, everything about it has been politicized since the beginning, April, May. I mean, it's been a political deal since the get-go.
Well, my gal, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, issued a tweet, just very, thankful for frontline workers, something like that. And you should have seen the replies. You know how many people are dead their numbers are exactly the same as the state of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly the same. People are just going to believe what they want to believe.
The pandemic is also changing us. Not only is it evident that the country has never behaved this way, it's evident that the pandemic is being seized upon for a variety of reasons. For example, we mentioned this fellow last week, restaurateur Brian Ingram. He owns the Gnome on Selby Avenue in St. Paul, in the Cathedral Hill area.
Yes.
And he criticized St. Paul city officials. And Sunday, Mayor Melvin Carter responded. He was robbed. He's got 21 security cameras. He's on a pace to be robbed about 3 times every 10 days.
Jeez.
And Carter said, well, we have a lot of work in front of us. This is a top priority for both our police department and our entire administration. Carter put a large amount of blame on the pandemic, citing high unemployment. We have more people unemployed, hungry, and homeless right now than ever before in our lifetime. And those are always the factors that influence neighborhood crime, he said, which is utter BS. Ingram says it's a weak excuse, considering the suspect, finally arrested in the robbery of his business, has a lengthy felony record spanning more than 2 decades. The pandemic has nothing to do with it. He's a mid-50s professional criminal. According to St. Paul Police, Earl York, 57, was arrested last Thursday and charged with third-degree burglary. Police say his record includes at least 23 prior felony convictions.
You got to keep this guy in the tank. You can't let him go.
Including 16 burglaries. Career criminal robs us, and you're talking about COVID and all this nonsense, Ingram said. You don't learn how to break into a business and get in and out in 4 minutes just during COVID. That's not true. In a Facebook post, the Ramsey County Deputies Federation blamed the court system, saying they had arrested York in a string of robberies last summer, but charges were dismissed.
Why?
We support and agree with local business owner Brian Ingram. Unfortunately, all too often, we see repeat offenders released from custody with little, if any, consequences. Carter said they are making immediate changes in policing to address current problems, but says long-term structural changes are needed. I'll tell you what those should be in a moment. A public safety system that only focuses on emergency response after someone calls 911 after something terrible has happened is not sufficient, said Carter. This is his way of saying that we need to reimagine public safety. Ingram, who has received backlash for speaking out. Why should he receive backlash for speaking out? All he does is tell the truth.
From whom?
Yeah.
What's
I suppose on social media or whatever.
Oh, my Lord.
He can't keep falling back and say we're going to have a study group, Ingram said of the mayor. I think he should have a study group and we should have criminal reform. What are we doing right now? Okay, here's the deal. If we had a reasonable mayor who cared about all of us, this is true in Minneapolis. This is true the closer you get to the country's tallest buildings. If we had mayors who were taking care of the basics, you would not have a mayor in the case of Carter with what's the latest? About a 13-member cabinet.
Oh, it's more than that. I thought it was 16.
Maybe it's 16, all of whom with job titles that are absolutely unable to be measured for achievement or success, and all of whom probably make what, between 90 and 120 grand a year. How many police officers would that put back on the street?
At least 2. Oh,
You go back to Mayor George Latimer, he had 2 people. He didn't have 60. He had 2 people. He had Dick Broker and another guy. He had somebody that run up to the Capitol once in a while. What we have seen, though, is the salon has taken over the country's tallest buildings and have loosed upon us a miserable world. A miserable world. They have no identity remotely with what's happening on the streets of St. Paul.
Nope.
None. And so let's say there's $1.5 million. What's the starting salary for a policeman? Could somebody look it up real quick?
50 or 60?
I was going to say 50. That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's
Well, how many-
under
how-
100.
How many times does 50 go into $1.5 million? Somebody quickly, please. I'm not allowed to do math. How many times does 50 grand go into $1.5 million?
Don't ask me. I'm not. I got no
1,500,000
Carry the
divided
one.
by 50,000 equals 30.
There's 30 new cops on the street if you get rid of this useless cabinet, which doesn't do anything. There's 30 new cops on the street. They're down 36 from this time last year. There's your 30 right there. There's your 30.
Well, and the other problem is you're going to need to find 30 that want to do the job after what they've been enduring these last.
Well, there are efforts underway now to reopen a recruiting system.
Minimum starting salary in the city of St. Paul, 64,200.
All right.
So it's
That's
probably
considerably
closer to 20.
less. That's considerably less than anyone on Melvin's cabinet is making. That's less. And I think I speak for a lot of residents. I would rather have the cops than your director of equity and diversity.
Well, yeah, who wouldn't?
I want the cops. I don't want to drive around now constantly admonishing people leaving the house what they got to do to be careful. But that's what it's come to. And you're not even hearing about all of the carjackings. These kids are on, these kids I used to have are on these community sites, whatever
Yeah.
they're called.
Yep.
Not a day goes by when there isn't another carjacking.
Mm-hmm.
No, and most often it's 2 a day.
Chris was right. There's 16 cabinet members.
16.
And I cannot. Your newspaper's website makes a guy.
I know it's a bad website, but be
It's,
patient. Be
Yeah,
patient.
no, it pulled it. It kicked me off.
Yeah. In the meantime, Minneapolis is making news on news sites all over the world because they've been crying and crying and crying about defunding the police. But now the city council just voted unanimously to spend $6.4 million to recruit dozens of new police officers. This story
Free money, Joe.
appeared on the same day yesterday. That was I didn't see that in the Minneapolis paper. This is from the St. Paul Sunday Pioneer Press. City council voted unanimously to approve funding. City to spend $6.4 million to recruit dozens of police officers in Minneapolis. On the same day, yesterday, that the Star Tribune had on its front page, police overhaul campaign launched by the George Soros group.
Oh,
Yes for Minneapolis, the numeral 4, as a political committee. It's collecting petition signatures to ask voters in November whether to replace the department with a new entity that would take a comprehensive public health approach to safety. A coalition of progressive groups such as Racism, the Bloc, Reclaim the Block and Take Action Minnesota are part of the effort, and they received $500,000 from the Washington, D.C. based group Open Society Policy Center, which we have discussed. That's the lobbying arm of Open Society Foundations, a philanthropic group founded by billionaire George Soros. The committee wants to get 20,000 signatures by March 31st to help ensure the proposed charter amendment gets on the ballot to not have police force.
They'll get them. They'll get them.
Then what did they just release $6.4 million for to hire new cops? We are led by some of the most incompetent people imaginable. They have managed to land on city council seats, probably due to a overwhelming apathy by most people.
Yep, right there.
Just due to an overwhelming apathy, or contented people who have good jobs and don't really pay attention and really don't care. And so you end up with, the Lisa Benders and the Philippe Cunninghams and the rest of these cuckoos who are incompetent. You've been crying all year to defund the police. Now you can't wait to rush in and spend which I approve of, to spend $6.4 million to get more police because you realize that crime is out of control. 2 people shot dead in their car last night outside Roosevelt High School.
And one of them was a pregnant woman.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been 28th.
Yep.
8 blocks, and I call them short blocks from where I used to live. 8 blocks. Kid used to walk to school.
Well, not a troubled neighborhood by any stretch of the imagination.
Awesome neighborhood.
Yeah.
Awesome. South
Not a
Minneapolis
troubled neighborhood by any stretch of the imagination.
Yep. And we never had issues until after the riots. And now it's just a nightmare.
It's
Because
the
signal that was sent by the reigning political salon was, you are entitled to act out because of the death of George Floyd. You are entitled to act out.
Right.
Yeah, and your mayor just said it. You said it. You started this discussion with his response to that business owner, and it sounds to me like he's been watching. You remember the old movie Such Fun with Dick and Jane?
Yeah,
Dick
vaguely.
and Jane lose their their high paying jobs and go on a crime spree to pay off their lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's what he thinks this is.
Yeah.
What a jackass!
Yeah.
Yeah.
57-year-old career criminal, has nothing to do with the pandemic.
Well, he's
Nothing.
hungry, Joe. He's
Wow.
hungry because, the pandemic.
It changed. The pandemic changed his life in 1 year.
Right.
In 1 year, his life was changed.
He's probably doing better this year than he's ever done.
Right. I got a raise.
Yeah,
right.
they're the only people making a profit during the pandemic.
Well, I wrote yesterday about crime in St. Paul, and I violated my own policy.
Yeah. How'd that go?
I read the comments on the
Yep.
column,
Yep.
and
Told
in
you
the
not
column,
to.
in the column, I told the story of what I told you guys about a couple of weeks ago, how I went into a Walgreens behind 3 teenage girls who, as I was paying for a ream of copy paper, scurried out the door giddily, each with a carry basket of beauty products. And I said, wait a minute, there's no way they could have paid for that. I went out, got a license plate number, brought it back into the manager, and he said, yeah, I'll call it in. But the poor fellow was so resigned to this. I don't know if he did or he didn't. But the comments were, who cares about Walgreens? They're a giant corporation.
Yep.
They have billions
that
of dollars.
again.
Yeah.
That
And
again.
so the level of intellect among the readers is so low that it's astonishing. Now, there were many commenters who liked the piece and said wise things, but there were at least a dozen people commenting that, well, it's only Walgreens. Who cares? What do you care about? What's an old man like you, Souchere, worrying about Walgreens' loss prevention program?
That is entitlement. Wow.
That's not what I was writing about.
You're right, Matthew. That is entitlement.
They're so big that it doesn't matter. They're going to be fine.
That's
I got
on
mine.
par. That's on par with Fry saying, "Yeah, it's just brick and mortar." It's that sort of ignorance.
Well, then maybe we don't need to be so puzzled by who gets elected. If that's a prevailing mindset, if strident liberalism is a prevailing mindset, the closer you get to the country's tallest buildings, then maybe we shouldn't be surprised that you're going to continue to elect these people.
Right.
Because they're no dummies. These city council people know exactly who they're playing to. They know exactly who they're playing to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know you were going to be this good.
Yeah,
today.
right.
Either did I hate to be this good.
I knew.
Raises the
all
bar. Really
along.
raises the bar.
Raises the bar.
All morning I've been, oh, he's going to be good today. Oh, Suches. Yeah.